come to make an announcement. Women.
Welcome back to my DC Rivals Art Challenge series. This is the series where I take the popular hero shooter Marvel Rivals and challenge myself to paint DC's iconic cast in the game's distinctive style. Last time we redesigned Green Lantern and The Flash, adding them to our ever-growing Justice League. However, this time I wanted to represent more of the many female superheroes in the DC universe, so I've gone ahead and chosen 3 lovely ladies to redesign. Just like in the first episode, we have a vanguard, a duelist, and a strategist. So for the sake of variety, let's spice things up and start with the strategist first. In a world of gods and monsters, those who practice magic decide the fate of the world. And few are more accomplished in the mystic arts than Zatanna Zatara. Born to the great Giovanni Zatara and Cindella the Homo Magi, Zatanna is DC's premier magic user right alongside John Constantine. Not only an internationally renowned stage magician, and you can tell it's a fantasy world because that title actually garners some respect, but also one of the most powerful sorcerers in the DC universe. Her most famous power is her use of logomancy, aka speaking spells backwards into existence. So if she wanted to make something levitate, she would say, Itartivel. If she wanted to set something on fire, she'd say, Etinjai. Or my personal favourite, Ikil, Nemok, Na, Eberxbus. See? Nope, you gotta do it now, I said it backwards and everything. Created by writer Gardner Fox and artist Murphy Anderson, Zatanna first appeared in 1964 in Hawkman No. 4, where she featured in a story about finding her missing father, while balancing her double life as an international performer and superhero. Zatanna is one of DC's most prolific characters, so it was inevitable that I would include her at some point. And with all the cool spells she can use, I think she'd be best served causing mischief on the back line as a strategist. To start off, we're going for a slightly more playful pose, with her tipping her top hat and holding her wand off to the side. I really had to engage my gesture drawing skills for this one to capture that casual but sort of flirty stance. I wanted her to project mischief, like she knows she's about to cause havoc for the enemy team. Then with the pose down, it's time for ironing out the outfit. The blazer, the hats, the boots, and the fishnets. One of the things I like about Zatanna's outfit is that it's based off of a real stage magician's costume. She's had other looks throughout the years with some artists trying to distance her from that world, but in my opinion it's so intrinsic to her visual identity that it's practically irreplaceable. That being said, it is important to acknowledge that she plays into a type of showmanship that borders on objectification. Some of her outfits play more into it than others, but it's always remained as an undercurrent to her design. The question is, how far do I lean into that? Because Marvel Rivals certainly doesn't shy away from making its characters attractive, especially their female characters. You only have to take a look at Emma Frost for proof of that, and the community certainly encourages this with their overwhelming response to each reveal. To be fair, it's been an ongoing quirk, shall we say, of the comic book industry for a while, and while I wanted to avoid that as much as possible, it is an aspect of Rivals design language that I at least have to take into account. For me personally, I'm not really interested in catering to that crowd. I'd rather focus on making an appealing design first that stays true to the source material, and simply put, Zatanna is deliberately flamboyant and performative. She is, by her very nature, this theatrical character, so the core of my design was to emphasize that most of all. However, as much as I tried to remain faithful to her comics counterpart, I also wanted to add my own unique twist as well, and that mainly came from giving her a tertiary colour to add just a bit more character to her design. In the end, I chose purple because it's a very rich, extravagant colour, but it also originates from her older appearances before she settled into a more monochromatic colour palette. And speaking of which, I also added a lot more white, weaving it into the design as a way to highlight the different sections of her costume. I especially like how it lines the edges of her blazer, helping the lapels to stand out, and it breaks up that area of black into something more readable. Not only that, but I want to give her a definitive motif, a shape that I could weave into the design throughout. And eventually I settled upon a diamond, more specifically using sharp right angles whenever possible. It's most clearly seen in the pattern of the fishnets, but the more you look for it, the more you'll see it crop up, like in the cut of her waistcoat or her shoulders. I like how you have these very neat, rigid angles juxtaposed with sweeping curves, like the coattails and the strands of her hair. It makes for a nice contrast, and speaking of the coattails, I use them to spice up her silhouette by shaping them into these really exaggerated curls. It's very cartoonish, and it's probably the most outlandish choice I made for this design, but I just couldn't help adding in a little extra theatricality. I think it's a nice touch. In terms of how she would play in-game, well, Zatanna can technically do anything, so the real challenge is limiting her powers to a defined kit. Otherwise, she could just turn the ground into melted cheese and the air into jelly or something. Obviously, with a character like that, you can make her more defensive or offensive, but I think she'd be way more engaging if you prioritise doing weirdo shit. Something like switching an enemy's controls or turning off gravity, making her this absolute wildcard that just flips the entire battle on its head. Perhaps the most sadistic idea I've ever had for an ultimate ability is what I'm calling Showstopper. Upon encountering the spell Saya Noem, Zatanna gets a huge health and speed boost, and everyone on the enemy team is forced to look in her direction. Until the ability runs out, they cannot look away. That might not seem very helpful at first glance, but imagine that your entire team is trying to make a push, only for a rogue Zatanna to sneak into your backline and pull that, forcing you to remove your focus from the point. It would be so ungodly annoying, and for that reason alone, I need to see it happen. For the final touches, I decided to add this diamond texture across the waistcoat and the linings of the coattails, as well as lining the shirt with these stripes folds, because without it, those areas stuck out as these blocks of plain colour distracting from the rest of the outfit. They just needed something to help them sink back into the ensemble, and doing so really helps the white highlights stand out much more clearly. And just like that, it's time for DC's Sorcerer Supreme to take a bow. Zatanna? More like, Zamtanna! I'm so sorry about him, ladies and gentlemen. It will not happen again. Yeah, I'm really happy with how she turned out. It's pretty much exactly what I was going for when I first imagined her as a character in the game. It's not the most involved redesign, I will admit, but I think it captures so much of her appeal, and it definitely feels reminiscent of Rival's more playful style. She's only the first superheroine on our list for today. Shall we head stage right and see who else is waiting in the wings? Okay, I swear that's the last bit, but anyway, moving on. We've met many heroes hailing from the United States in this series, and even one from the mythical paradise of Themyscira. But for this next hero, we're taking a trip to Africa, specifically Ghana, where many years ago, a warrior named Tantu was gifted a magical artifact by the spider god Anansi, granting him all the powers of the animal kingdom, so long as he used it to protect the innocent. This artifact was passed down through generations until eventually it landed in the hands of Marie Jiwe Makabe, aka Vixen. Created by writer Jerry Conway and artist Bob Oxner, Vixen was intended to be the first African woman to head her own comic series, but her very first issue was lost during what was known as the DC implosion of 1978, in which a whole bunch of ongoing series were cancelled due to a rocky financial year for DC Comics. Vixen has always maintained a strong legacy despite this, being a regular member of the Justice League as well as many other teams like the Suicide Squad. However, outside of the animated shows, a character slot in Injustice, and a brief appearance in Arrow, Vixen hasn't really been given much representation. She's not entirely obscure. I would imagine most DC Comics fans would at least recognise her, but I wouldn't say she's really hit the mainstream either, which is a shame because her background and her power set makes her one of the most interesting DC heroes. The Tanzu totem, for example, allows her to channel a morphogenic field known as the Red, a primal energy source akin to the Speed Force, giving her the powers of any animal you can imagine. With just one thought, she can become as fast as a cheetah, as vicious as a lion, or as powerful as a charging elephant. And that strength can be proportional too, such as when she used the strength of a rhino beetle to rip the lid off of a tank. And if she were to copy a spider, she'd basically just become Spider-Man. So long as it's a living animal, the Red can channel its powers, and considering that this is a universe where both dragons and krakens are real living things, that's nothing to scoff at. In fact, technically, humans are animals too, as proven when Vixen gained super speed by copying Jay Garrick, aka The Flash. The more you think about her powers, the more broken she becomes, so I think she would be an absolute menace as a duelist. Starting off, I wanted to concentrate on giving her a unique build, with these long, powerful legs that make her tall and imposing. I deliberately posed her in the style of a model, with her face reflecting that with her perfect makeup and cheekbones and styled hair, and that was done to reflect her civilian career as a supermodel. Marie's modelling career was specifically chosen because, according to her creator Jerry Conway, it was one of the few careers that a woman could pursue in the late 70s that would provide enough income for a superhero. It serves as a fascinating contrast to a character like Bruce Wayne, whose nebulous, limitless fortune is just written off as the result of being part of a rich family, and how that just wasn't a realistic option for a character like Marie in the 70s. However, Marie being a model does give me an excuse to really think about the intricacies of her costume. For the most part, it's a fairly simple ensemble, with the big identifying factors being the colour, the claws, and the collar. Everything else is subject to change depending on the artist, with more modern designs including these black sections to help break up the yellow, but in my opinion it's an incredibly generic costume. It's clear that a lot of artists have struggled to give her a coherent visual identity aside from being a superhero, which to me makes her the perfect candidate for the redesign treatment. For my take, I wanted to really lean more into her African origins to help set her apart from the other heroes. Something I like to do when redesigning a character is to choose a specific time or place to draw influence from, and in this instance I looked at traditional African dresses as well as using the Zimbabwe Fashion Week entries as reference. I was looking out for any patterns or small accessories I could use to spice up the design, and eventually I came across the answer. You see, some versions of Vixen's outfit have these tiger stripes up the sides of her body, and while I really liked the idea in concept, I just needed a different pattern to make it come together, and in the end I found this. I chose this pattern specifically because it's very reminiscent of claws, these sharp acute angles that look very confrontational. Plus it would be really easy to slot in a whole range of new colours to break up the yellow colour palette. I also chose these patterns to give the costume a bit of variety while keeping to the same general theme. Of course, actually implementing these patterns was a bit of a pain in the arse. I definitely wouldn't use this design for a comic book knowing I'd have to draw it over and over again, but for a video game where it's only meant to be rendered once, it's perfect. And what can I say? It really anchors the costume in a cultural moment. It gives it a sense of identity it just didn't really have before, at least in my opinion. Plus, I think it's beautiful to look at. The use of shape and colour to fill the space is really satisfying. At one point in development, I wanted to make a reference to the red by including a spectral lion lying across her shoulders, like you see with Godry and his buddy Sarosh in Elden Ring. I included it in my concept sketch for the outfit on my Patreon, and you can see it on screen now, but in the end, I didn't really have the time to make it work, so it ended up on the cutting room floor. Still, I think it looks cool as hell, so I just wanted to include it here as an aside. Now, in terms of how Vixen would play, she'd obviously be an incredibly aggressive character with a lot of mobility. Think Iron Fist, for example. But with all the animals in the animal kingdom to draw her powers from, it could make for a really interesting character kit. Maybe you could choose from a set of animals that each give you certain buffs and debuffs depending on the situation. Damage, health and speed, that sort of thing. Like how Shulk uses the Monado in Super Smash Bros., which is not a comparison I thought I'd be making today. As for her ultimate, perhaps she could pick a member of the enemy team and channel their powers for a short while. Like how Loki can steal other players' ultimates for use for himself. Call it something like, I don't know, seeing red, caught red-handed, turning red. No. The final touches for this piece are just readjusting tonal values, making sure the colours stand out against one another, especially across the side of her body and her skin. Like with Jon Stewart, I wanted to give her this darker, richer skin tone, while also making sure to keep it readable in contrast to the dark yellow of her suit. And with that, Vixen is ready for her runway finale. Let's take a look. I am so happy with this design. This is the first time where I really feel like I've contributed something to the character that wasn't there before. I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but this definitely is one of my favourite designs from the series so far. I think it's really beautiful. However, our final heroine of the video might just take the cake. Hold on. Look! Up in the sky! Is it a bird? Oh yes! Oh, well that was easy. over! That's right, our final heroine for the video is none other than Hawkgirl. Originally created by writer Gardner Fox and artist Dennis Neville all the way back in 1940. However, this specific Hawkgirl that we're referring to today is Kendra Saunders, created by David S. Goyer, yes, that David S. Goyer, and the artist Steven Sadowski in 1999. Younger viewers will probably recognise her for her part in the recent Superman film, which, may I say, peak. And you might be wondering, Ted, that character was pretty cool and incredibly based. If you saw the film, you'd know. What's her origin story?
Okay, folks, I'm gonna try and do this in one take, so strap in, try to stay with me.
Kendra Saunders is the grandniece of the original Hawkgirl from the Golden Age, Shira Saunders, aka the reincarnation of an Egyptian princess called Chiara. She was the wife of the original Hawkman, aka Carter Hall, aka the Egyptian Prince Khufu, who both lived on Earth 1, which was then retconned into Earth 2, then merged into the new Earth 1, which meant that there were now two separate Hawkmen and Hawkgirls, both with the same aliases, with the new Earth 1 versions being alien police officers from the planet Thanagar. Justice League cartoon enjoys? This is your girl still following along? But shortly afterwards, Shira and Carter were then banished into Limbo to prevent Ragnarok, yes, the Ragnarok. Then they returned from Limbo only to find a different Hawkman and Hawkwoman, also alien police officers from the planet Thanagar, because actually the other Hawkgirl was really a brainwashed human called Sharon working with an alien sleeper agent pretending to be Hawkman, but he's gone now and Sharon's dead, so we have a new Hawkwoman and her name is Shiera Thal II, and that's that. Except after that, Shira's soul was then merged with Carter Hall and the new Hawkman from Thanagar and a weird Hawk god thing into one body, becoming a new Hawkman who was then banished to the spirit realm because no one understood what the was going on for the character anymore, and then the remaining Hawkwoman was then retired to become a policewoman in Detroit. Oh god, that didn't age well, did it? So then finally we're introduced to Kendra Saunders, who turns out is actually the reincarnated soul of her own grand aunt Shira, who slipped into Kendra's body after she let's say she tried to take herself out of the equation. So Kendra is actually Shira, but she still thinks of herself as Kendra, which is really awkward because then the original Hawkman, Carter Hall, is eventually resurrected and he finds out that Kendra is Shira and decides he wants to court his own grandniece. Then sometime after that, Kendra dies but comes back as just Kendra. No more Shira this time, her soul is gone now, except then Kendra dies again but is resurrected with Shira's soul in Kendra's body, so Kendra is just gone now, I guess. Then the universe was rebooted, so Kendra never even happened in the first place, that people didn't like that, so then there was another reboot that was also reintroducing the old continuity, so now Kendra's back and she's still Shira Hall's grandniece, except she's also the reincarnation of Shara, who was an angel cursed by God to forever reincarnate with Qatar the Deathbringer, and both Princess Chiara and Shira were some of her previous incarnations. Nice and simple. Except it turns out when Shira died, her soul was ripped in half by some eldritch being called Perpetua and reincarnated it into two separate Hawkgirls. So now we have both Kendra Saunders from Earth and Shiera Thal from Thanagar, both flying around calling themselves Hawkgirl at the same time.
And they say comics are difficult to get into.
If I wanted to, I could spend this entire video just explaining the long and convoluted history of the Hawks, but as entertaining as it might be to watch my sanity slowly unravel under decades of crisscrossing continuity, I've wasted enough of your time already. Why'd I choose Kendra? The metal wings, mostly. What's her class? Vanguard. Let's go. Oh god, I think I destroyed my voice. Anyway, now for this design I wanted to take it a step beyond the comics version. Whereas Kendra has these nth metal wings that allow her to fly, I decided to target my eternal weakness and cover her entirely in some badass armor. If I was trying to channel any specific motif for this design, it was death metal, which is a nice fit considering Kendra's reintroduction into continuity occurred in Scott Snyder's Dark Knight's Metal. Plus I just think it's a really cool creative direction that helps Kendra feel more unique. I went about turning the blocks of colour in her costume into armour pieces, such as the blocks of yellow on her torso that I turned into a breastplate. That area specifically took a long time to crack because it's a very particular shape to model a piece of armour off of, but I ended up basing it on an archer's breastplate for the most part. Designing the rest was a fairly simple process though. This is probably the most superhero-y design that I've done out of the three, mainly because it leads into a more fantastical sci-fi design language that you find pretty often in comics. One of the main motifs I used was the inclusion of lots of metal feathers, such as on the gauntlets and the belt, and for that I crafted this sharp, sweeping wing-like shape to weave through the outfit in certain areas, just to help bring the entire outfit together. That, and I also added a load of spikes to give her a flavour of punk rock, that the whole world know that this ain't your grandma's Hawkgirl. Or is it? At this point in continuity, I don't even know. Of course, with all this nth metal taking centre stage, I wanted to make it really pop, to give it this pristine, gleaming appearance, which of course meant painting in a lot of reflections, and this is where the problems really began. This painting, by far and away, took the longest of the three to paint, not just in the design work, but the actual process of drawing and rendering. It certainly wasn't the most difficult design to crack, nor was it very difficult to paint per se, it was just incredibly tedious. I have no idea how comic artists can draw all those blades and feathers consistently. I'd give myself carpal tunnel by like the second page. Rendering the wings alone took up hours. Nearly a quarter of this time lapse is just painting and tidying up each individual feather. But it was more than worth the effort, because you can see by the end you end up with this really cool looking design. It reminds me a lot of a heavy metal album cover, and for that alone, I'm really happy with how they look. Now, as for her gameplay, I pitched her as a Vanguard primarily because her wings give her this really substantial silhouette that a Vanguard needs, and they can protect other people like a moving wall. But their mobility as well was another factor, because allowing a Vanguard to soar around in the air would make for a really great change of pace. Plus, the mace would make her incredibly formidable. It's got that weight that you'd expect from a Vanguard. A lot of people were slightly disappointed that I didn't make Wonder Woman a Vanguard, but to me, a Vanguard isn't just someone who's really strong. It's a character who naturally lends themselves to a slower, more methodical style of gameplay. When I think of Wonder Woman, I picture her as someone who is fast, agile and precise, someone who dances across the battlefield, whereas Hawkgirl feels like a character with a lot of weight behind her, who uses brute force to clear the path and soak up damage. As for her ultimate, maybe she could channel energy through the nth metal in her armour and her mace, buffing both herself and everyone around her, like Thor or Captain America does. Nothing too flashy, but enough to incentivize sticking with the pack rather than flying too far away from the team and getting caught out. With that, as we finish the backlight and touch up some smaller details in the armour, we're finally ready to unveil the final result. Come on, you have to admit she looks pretty awesome. Sure, it took way too long to paint, but in the end I think I've managed to come up with something pretty special. I mean, tell me she wouldn't fit on a heavy metal album cover. And putting them all side by side with the rest of the league, I think they just look really cool. It reminds me so much of the cartoon. Sure, there are a couple of members still missing, but at the moment we've got a pretty substantial and varied roster of characters, and I'm really happy with how they all look together. But enough of what I think, what do you guys think? Could you imagine these three ladies starring in Marvel Rivals? Comment your thoughts down below, and while you're scrolling, don't forget to like the video and maybe subscribe if you want to see more from this series. If you want to support the channel directly, then head over to my Patreon. For just £2 a month, you can see all of my videos a day early, as well as get sneak peeks on what I'm working on next. I also post the occasional exclusive video that's more off the cuff, so if you're interested, click the link in the description below. As for what's next, I'm probably going to be taking a break from the DC Rivals series, but don't worry, I won't be gone for long. There are just too many DC characters around that I would love to paint, so, you can't keep me away forever. Next time, though, for the next episode, I'm thinking we give some focus to the villains. So comment down below which DC villains you need to see me paint. Not just the Joker or Darkseid, I want to see some really obscure picks. So yeah, do comment down below any ideas that you have. I do read all of your comments, and I really appreciate the support that you've given to the series so far. It really warms my heart, and I'm so grateful for every single one of you. So, until next time, I hope you enjoy the video, and have a good life. Right, let's have a drink. This is going to be a long one, I can tell. Oh shit. Sorry, editing me.